With the release of Alex Garland's latest film, Civil War, quickly approaching, I wanted to go through all of his films. I have already covered Ex Machina, I have already covered Annihilation, and now it is time to revisit one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen, his latest feature, Men. So, let's get into it. So out of all of the Blu-rays that I own, this one is definitely the weirdest movie that I own. I watched it in the theater in 2022 when it came out, and I had very mixed emotions, but I came out of it feeling mostly positive, just giving it a passing grade. Back in the day when my YouTube channel was still really fresh, I gave Men a 3.5 out of 5. Now if we're talking about Rotten Tomatoes, 3.5 for me, and above would be a fresh score. Anything under that would be a rotten score. So I just gave it a fresh score, and I really was intrigued by the originality of the film. It goes to some really wacky places, and it gets to the point where it just gets far too self-indulgent, and it fell apart. I found that the ending in that initial watch just hurt this film so much, and now looking back on it and understanding exactly every single thing that is going on with this movie now, it gives you a very different perspective when watching it, and I don't think it helps the film all that much. Looking back now, I actually feel like I was being really generous with that score, because on a rewatch, I do think that this movie is not as sophisticated as it feels when you first are watching this. I didn't know anything about the Green Man mythology or anything like that, and I don't think many people did. But when you discover what that is, and you look into this film more and more, it just falls apart, and it feels so superficial and shallow on a rewatch, understanding all of the context of everything. A really good movie, especially one in this kind of genre where you're trying to figure things out, can be really well executed, and when it is really well executed, you can look at it from so many different angles and still really appreciate it. I get that feeling from watching Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. That film has so much for you to interpret, and I've seen that so many times now that I completely understand exactly everything that is going on with that movie, but yet I still feel like I get something new out of it every single time, whether that's one small subtle detail, something new that I discover with the performances that always just makes the thing feel fresh. With Men, it just never really does that on this rewatch. It felt like I was just watching the same thing again with the same experience, except now I know everything, and I wasn't really discovering anything new here. Before I start getting into the nitty-gritty of some of the story details, just know that I am going to spoil a lot of things with this movie, particularly the ending, so I guess if you do want to see this movie, go check it out before you see this review, because I'll be talking about full spoilers here. So I think the concept of Men is really original, and I think a masterpiece is hidden in this movie somewhere. I do think Alex Garland had a very good idea here of having these different characters played by the same actor, who does a fantastic job, by the way. Rory Kinnear just commits here. Some of these characters and the way that they're all different are so distinct. They all feel like different characters. So I have to really credit the actor here and all of the performances that he gives here, because it kind of gives this movie a lot of personality and is the core thesis of this film, which is looking at different types of toxic masculinity. There's all of these different characters, and they all represent a different form of that. There's more traditional types, more subtle types, from all different age groups and all different positions of power, that I think is very interesting. I think having it hidden inside this horror movie that feels very creepy at times is really effective, and I do think that the way that this is shot, the way it sounds is phenomenal. I particularly really like the score for this movie. It blends sounds that our protagonist Harper makes in a tunnel with the music later on in the movie, which is such an innovative way of implementing a score into a film, because it now feels like it's a part of the whole thing. It feels authentic to this movie, which is a really interesting choice that I do think works. I also have to talk about Jessie Buckley, who is fantastic in this movie. She's really giving it her all, and I do think that to this day, it is her best performance. She has so much range in this movie. She goes through so much as this character that has experienced such trauma and guilt that I just thought was really profound in this film. And like I say, with these different elements, I just think that the ingredients of something really special are here. And we know from Alex Garland's previous films, Ex Machina and Annihilation, that he can reach that level, but he just doesn't here. And that's once again the problem with this movie. You figure out that Rory Kinnear is playing all these different types of toxic masculinity. You find out that the weird naked man stalking her around the house is the Green Man, and it is a metaphor for rebirth. And then you get this big rebirth scene at the end, which is fucking disgusting. And on a rewatch, it just all just feels so shallow because I know all of this, but there's nothing new that this film presents me on a rewatch. So I just kind of felt like I was wasting my time rewatching this movie and going through some of the disgusting scenes that made me cringe so hard. The first time I watched it, I had a massive problem with the rebirth scene. I don't think that that was really needed at all. It was so indulgent and doesn't work at all. And I don't know how you can defend it. I don't know who would like to watch something like this, especially with something that feels as shallow as this and just tries to say the one thing that the film has actually been communicating to us constantly throughout the film anyway. So it all just feels redundant. It feels indulgent. It just feels like Alex Garland just believed in his hype a little bit too much with this movie. While I do appreciate its originality, I do appreciate some of its complexities, I just don't think it's as complex as what some people make this out to be. Also, just another thing that I did appreciate with this movie was the body horror. I mean, it does make you cringe at points. And while I do think the rebirth scene just takes it too far, there's a scene where the Green Man sticks his hand through a mail chute in the door. Harper stabs his arm and he pulls it out, and the knife goes all the way through his arm and through his hand. That was disgusting, but it was effective in the right way. If you're looking for body horror, that's kind of the stuff that you want. Yes, it makes you feel queasy. It makes you feel, you just cringe at it. But in the way that the film really wants you to. The rebirth scene, it's like, come on, man, what are you doing here? It's just, I don't know. There's moments like that that just really hurt the film. And that's not the only thing that I have an issue with. It's not like I saw that scene and got completely put off by it. I have a problem with how shallow this feels. There were moments that I was really enjoying the first time I watched it that didn't work as well on a rewatch because once again, I'm not getting anything new from these scenes. I'm looking for all these details now that I have the full context of the movie, have looked into it so thoroughly over the years that it just doesn't give me anything. And I have looked at films with way more scrutiny, with way more of a closer glance than what I have this, and I'm still able to pick up new details from it, and this just isn't that. Once again, and that's what I find so disappointing with Men. It just doesn't offer anything new, and a really true complex film that does tie all these themes together can give you a lot on a rewatch with all of the context of what you know after the first watch. I still think that this is one of the most insane movies I've ever seen. It was definitely the most insane movie of 2022. I did like some of the things that it was presenting. I do think Rory Kinnear and Jessie Buckley are fantastic. Out of all of the different men characters, I especially like Jeffrey. He's like this old chap who is just really charming in this very strange and uncomfortable way at points. But the way it's played is just excellent. And he was probably the character that has the most complexity to him. You could say that with the Pope figure as well, but in the end, he's just some evil Pope guy that is abusive. And you kind of know exactly where it's going. It plays into almost a cliche, it feels. It's because it's been done to death. There's just moments like that where, yes, it is doing something original and different, but at the same time, it's not. At some points, it feels complex and nuanced, but then when you rewatch it, it's actually very on the nose and very simple. And it's just this mess in the end that just feels so inferior to the rest of Alex Garland's work because we know that he's so talented and so masterful in his craft. You see an Ex Machina or an Annihilation. Both are complex movies, but they're able to weave together everything in such a satisfying way and draw out some really interesting conversations afterwards, no matter how many times you've seen it. Men is a movie that you might watch once if you're really into artistic films like I am, but then it just doesn't give you anything more, and it all just feels like a waste of potential. I don't know what score I would give this movie now, but it would be a lot less than a 3.5. I just don't think that this is a good movie anymore. It just doesn't impress me like it did back then. Especially back then, I was hopeful that I would get more from a rewatch, and that just didn't happen. So I do think that this is a lot weaker than what I initially thought it was. Anyway, those are my thoughts towards Men. Let me know what you think about this very wild movie in the comments below. Tell me how I'm wrong if you're really into the movie, or tell me how I'm really right if you hate the movie. I know there's both crowds and they're both as passionate as the next, but I'm kind of somewhere in the middle on this. I'm not really interested at all in watching this movie again, because it just didn't offer anything new, and I'm not going to go through some of the more disturbing elements of this movie for something that's not really going to give me anything. It just seems like a waste of my time. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.